A chilling voice spoke Jonathan Roumie's name at 3:33 a.m., captured on a recording that would redefine his faith and shake the world. In a dimly lit Chicago apartment, Jonathan clutched his phone, the eerie audio from that sleepless night still haunting him 6 months later. "I've never shared this with a soul," he murmured to the podcast host, his voice trembling with the weight of what he was about to unveil. What happened wasn't just bizarre, it was a divine encounter so profound, he could only attribute it to God himself. For the first time, he was ready to press play and let the world hear the impossible. The host's eyes widened, hanging on every word, sensing a story that could change everything. "You might think I'm crazy," Jonathan warned, his finger poised over the play button, "but this recording will challenge everything you believe. The real question isn't if you'll believe him, it's whether you're ready for a truth that could transform your life. Craving a story that'll leave you speechless? Drop "Holy" in the comments, smash that subscribe button, and hold on tight for a mind-blowing twist at the end you won't see coming. 6 months earlier, Jonathan had been struggling with the most challenging season of his life. Despite The Chosen's massive success, he sat alone in his Chicago apartment at 2:47 a.m., surrounded by script pages for season 4 but unable to concentrate on a single word. The weight of portraying Jesus had begun to feel impossible. With millions of viewers seeing him as more than just an actor, he'd been receiving thousands of messages from people claiming miracles, healing, and life changes from watching the show, and the responsibility was crushing his spirit. His phone buzzed with another desperate message from a mother whose child was dying, begging him to pray because she believed Jesus himself could save her son. Jonathan stared at the screen, feeling like a fraud in his own skin, knowing he was just a broken man from New York who happened to look the part. The apartment felt suffocatingly quiet, except for the distant hum of Chicago traffic and the ticking of his grandmother's old clock on the wall. He'd been avoiding calls from his spiritual director, avoiding prayer, avoiding everything that reminded him of the faith he was supposed to represent. That night, Jonathan had reached his breaking point and made a decision that terrified him. He was going to quit The Chosen. He'd typed out his resignation letter to Dallas Jenkins 3 times, each draft more final than the last. The pressure of being seen as a spiritual figure had become unbearable, especially when his own faith felt as fragile as tissue paper. That he looked at the wooden crucifix his Lebanese grandmother had carved, the same one that had watched over him through his darkest moments, and whispered the first honest prayer he'd said in weeks. "God, if you're really there, if this role means something more than just acting, I need you to show me," he pleaded into the darkness of his apartment. He'd never asked for a sign before. Had always believed faith should be enough, but desperation had stripped away his theological pride. The digital clock on his nightstand glowed 3:32 a.m. as he sat in complete silence, waiting for something, anything, to break through the suffocating doubt. Little did he know that in exactly 60 seconds, his entire understanding of God's presence would be shattered forever. At precisely 3:33 a.m., Jonathan's apartment filled with a presence so tangible it made the hair on his arms stand up. The temperature in the room seemed to shift, not colder or warmer, but somehow different, charged with an energy that made his breathing shallow. His phone, which had been sitting silently on the coffee table, suddenly lit up and began recording a voice memo on its own. The screen showed the red recording dot pulsing, but Jonathan hadn't touched the device, hadn't even been near it. A voice began to speak through his phone speaker, clear and unmistakable but unlike anything Jonathan had ever heard before. It wasn't his voice, wasn't coming from any app or notification, and the tone carried an authority that made his knees weak. "Jonathan," the voice said, and hearing his name spoken with such intimate knowledge made tears spring to his eyes instantly. The recording app showed sound waves moving across the screen, capturing every word of what was happening. Though Jonathan couldn't understand how this was possible, the voice continued, "You have been chosen not because you are perfect, but because you are willing to be broken for my purposes," each word resonating through the small apartment like thunder. Jonathan's hands shook as he reached for the phone, but something told him not to touch it, not to interrupt whatever was happening. The voice carried a love so pure and complete that it made his previous understanding of divine affection seem like a shallow puddle compared to an ocean. Every cell in his body seemed to recognize this presence, as if he'd been waiting his entire life to hear these exact words. "The messages you receive from my children are not burdens but invitations to participate in my healing of their hearts," the voice explained with gentle firmness. Jonathan fell to his knees beside the couch, overwhelmed by the realization that God had been speaking through him all along, even when he felt like a fraud. The crucifix on his wall seemed to glow in the dim light, and he understood for the first time that his role wasn't about being worthy. It was about being available, being surrendered, being a vessel that God could fill with his own presence and love. The voice grew stronger, more personal. "When you speak my words on camera, I speak through you. When you embrace the broken, I embrace them through you." Jonathan's sobs echoed through the apartment as years of insecurity and self-doubt began to crumble under the weight of this divine revelation. He'd always felt like he was pretending to be holy, but now he understood that God's holiness could work through human brokenness. The recording device continued capturing every word, every sob, every moment of this supernatural encounter that was reshaping his entire identity. "Your grandmother's prayers have followed you here," the voice said, and Jonathan's breath caught in his throat. She had died 2 years earlier, but he could suddenly smell her kitchen, could feel her weathered hands blessing his forehead like she used to do when he was small. The wooden crucifix she'd carved seemed to pulse with warmth, as if her love was somehow present in the room with him. Jonathan realized that this moment wasn't just about him. It was about generations of faith that had led to this exact encounter with the divine. Through his tears, Jonathan managed to whisper, "Why me, Lord? Why choose someone so broken to represent your son?" The silence that followed wasn't empty but full, pregnant with a love so vast it made his chest ache. When the voice responded, it carried the tenderness of a father speaking to a beloved child who had finally come home. "Because my son was broken too. And in your brokenness, they see his humanity. In your healing, they see his resurrection." The words hit Jonathan like lightning, illuminating truths he'd never understood about his role or his faith. He wasn't supposed to be a perfect representation of Jesus. He was supposed to be a human one, flawed and real and struggling, just like everyone watching. The phone continued recording as Jonathan wept, capturing not just the supernatural voice but his own raw response to encountering God in such an intimate, undeniable way. He felt layers of performance and pretense falling away, leaving only the authentic man that God wanted to use. "Every tear you've cried in doubt, I have collected," the voice continued, and Jonathan could almost see the bottles of tears described in Psalm 56 verse 8. "You have kept count of my tossings, put my tears in your bottle. Are they not in your book? Every moment you felt unworthy, I have whispered your true identity as my beloved son." The apartment seemed to expand beyond its physical walls, as if Jonathan was sitting in the presence of eternity itself. His phone's battery should have died hours ago, but the screen remained bright, the recording continuing to capture this impossible conversation. The voice began to share things about Jonathan's future that made his heart race with anticipation and terror. The next season will not just be television. It will be revival. Hearts that have been closed for decades will open. Prodigal sons and daughters will return home. Jonathan listened in amazement as God painted a picture of the global impact the chosen would have, reaching people in the darkest corners of the earth. But the most shocking revelation was yet to come. "Tomorrow, you will receive a call from a woman named Margaret in Scotland," the voice said with startling specificity. "Her son has been in a coma for 6 months, but she will tell you that watching your portrayal of my son gave her hope to keep praying." Jonathan's eyes widened as he realized God was giving him a prophecy, a specific prediction about something that would happen in less than 24 hours. When she calls, you will know that this encounter was real, and you will share my love with her as I am sharing it with you now. The supernatural presence in the room grew even stronger, and Jonathan felt as if he was sitting at the feet of Jesus himself. Record this moment in your heart, but also preserve this recording, the voice instructed. And Jonathan understood that this audio file would become crucial evidence of God's intervention in his life. There will come a time when you must share this testimony with the world, when my children need to know that I still speak to those who seek me. The phone screen showed that 47 minutes of audio had been captured, though it felt like only seconds had passed. As the encounter continued, Jonathan felt his understanding of prayer completely transform. This wasn't just communication. It was communion, a meeting of souls that bridged the gap between heaven and earth. Your prayers have never been words in the air, the voice explained with infinite patience, echoing Matthew 6 verse 6. But when you pray, go into your room and shut the door and pray to your Father who is in secret. And your Father who sees in secret will reward you. They have been conversations with your Father who knows every need before you speak it. Jonathan realized that every prayer he'd ever whispered, even the angry ones, even the desperate ones, had been heard and treasured by the God of the universe. The voice began to address Jonathan's specific fears about the upcoming season of The Chosen. The scenes you will film in the coming months will be anointed in ways you cannot imagine, God promised. And Jonathan felt a supernatural confidence beginning to replace his anxiety. When you speak the words of my son, remember this moment. Remember that I am with you, that my spirit fills the spaces between the lines. The recording continued to capture every word, preserving this divine coaching session for a role that was far more than acting. Your co-stars will feel my presence through you, the voice continued, revealing God's plan for the entire cast and crew. Dallas will direct not just a show but a movement. The scripts will carry my heart to millions who have given up on church but not on me. Jonathan marveled at how God was using entertainment to reach people who would never set foot in a sanctuary. The Chosen wasn't just telling the story of Jesus. It was becoming a modern-day ministry, a digital tabernacle where people could encounter the living God. Through the spiritual fog of this encounter, Jonathan heard the voice share something that made his heart nearly stop. The little girl whose mother wrote to you tonight, she will be healed. The message on his phone from earlier that evening suddenly made sense, the desperate plea from a mother whose daughter was dying of leukemia. Not because of your prayers alone, but because my timing is perfect, and her healing will coincide with your obedience to share this testimony. Jonathan realized that his decision to continue with The Chosen would somehow be connected to a child's miraculous recovery. The supernatural encounter took an even more personal turn as the voice began to address Jonathan's relationships and future. The loneliness you carry will be replaced with divine companionship, God promised. And Jonathan felt the ache of isolation he'd carried for years beginning to ease. I am preparing someone whose heart beats in rhythm with yours, who will support your calling and share your burdens. The idea that God cared enough about his personal happiness to address it directly brought fresh tears to his eyes. Your father's criticism, which still echoes in your mind, is not my voice, the divine presence declared with firm compassion, echoing Psalm 27 verse 10, For my father and my mother have forsaken me, but the Lord will take me in. Jonathan's breath caught as God addressed the deepest wound in his heart, the feeling that he would never be good enough, smart enough, successful enough to earn love. I chose you before you were born, not because of your perfection, but because of your heart's capacity to love the broken. The healing that began in that moment went deeper than anything therapy or time could have accomplished. The voice continued to speak truths that shattered Jonathan's misconceptions about his calling. When you doubt your worthiness to portray my son, remember that I chose fishermen, tax collectors, and former persecutors to carry my message," the voice said, referencing Matthew 4 verse 19 and Acts 9 verse 15. The comparison to the original disciples made perfect sense suddenly. God had always chosen the unlikely, the imperfect, the broken. Your struggles with addiction, your battles with depression, your moments of rage, these are not disqualifications but qualifications for understanding my mercy. Jonathan felt the shame he'd carried for years dissolving in the presence of such radical acceptance. As the night wore on, the voice began to reveal specific details about future episodes that hadn't even been written yet. "In the scene where my son weeps over Jerusalem, you will feel my heart break for every lost soul in every city," God explained, giving Jonathan a preview of the emotional intensity he would experience while filming, as described in Luke 19 verse 41, "And when he drew near and saw the city, he wept over it. The tears you shed will not be acting. They will be mine, flowing through you for a world that desperately needs to know they are loved." The recording device captured every word of this supernatural script session. "The miracle scenes will carry real power," the voice continued. And Jonathan understood that the chosen would become a conduit for actual divine intervention in viewers' lives. "People will be healed while watching, not because of special effects, but because my spirit will move through the medium you've created together." The weight of this responsibility felt overwhelming and exhilarating at the same time. Jonathan was being entrusted with carrying God's presence into living rooms around the world through the vehicle of entertainment. The supernatural encounter took an unexpected turn as the voice began to address global events and the chosen's role in them. "In the coming months, the world will face storms that will drive people to seek me," God revealed with prophetic clarity. "Your show will be a lighthouse for those lost in the darkness, a reminder that I am still present, still active, still healing hearts." Jonathan realized that the timing of the chosen's production and release had been orchestrated by divine providence for such a time as this, echoing Esther 4 verse 14, "And who knows whether you have not come to the kingdom for such a time as this." "The criticism you will face for your faith will be fierce," the voice warned gently, preparing Jonathan for battles ahead, as foretold in John 15 verse 20, "If they persecuted me, they will also persecute you." Hollywood will not understand what they cannot control. But remember that my son faced the same opposition. The prophecy proved accurate, as Jonathan would later face intense scrutiny for his public expressions of faith. Every attack on your character will only serve to authenticate your testimony and drive more people to seek the truth you represent. As the encounter deepened, Jonathan felt his spiritual gifts awakening in ways he'd never experienced before. "You will begin to sense my presence in others," the voice explained. And Jonathan understood that his spiritual discernment was being heightened for ministry beyond acting. When you meet fans of the show, you will often know their needs before they speak them. This supernatural sensitivity would later prove invaluable as Jonathan began encountering people whose lives had been transformed by the chosen. The voice then shared something that made Jonathan's heart race with anticipation: "Your portrayal will reach the persecuted church in nations where my name is forbidden." God painted a picture of underground Christians watching the chosen in secret, finding courage to continue their faith despite deadly persecution. "Your face will become a symbol of hope in the darkest places on earth." The global scope of God's plan through one actor's obedience was staggering to contemplate. "But the greatest miracle will be the one no one sees," the voice continued, building toward a revelation that would shake Jonathan to his core. "Tomorrow, even at exactly 7:23 p.m., you will receive a call that will prove this encounter beyond any doubt." The specificity of the timing made Jonathan's hands tremble as he realized God was giving him an unmistakable sign. "The caller will repeat words from this conversation that you have shared with no one." The prophetic element of this supernatural encounter was about to become undeniably real. The divine presence began to speak about Jonathan's family lineage and the spiritual inheritance he carried. Your Lebanese grandmother's prayers have created a pathway for my spirit that extends through generations, God revealed, connecting Jonathan's calling to his ancestral faith. The wood from which she carved your crucifix came from a tree that grew in the shadow of Mount Lebanon, where my prophets once walked. The historical and spiritual significance of his grandmother's simple gift suddenly became profound. In the final seasons of The Chosen, you will speak words that will echo in eternity, the voice prophesied, giving Jonathan a glimpse of the ultimate impact his work would have. The crucifixion scene will be filmed on the anniversary of my son's actual death, and my presence will be so strong that everyone on set will feel it. The idea that God was orchestrating even the filming schedule for maximum spiritual impact was breathtaking in its attention to detail. The supernatural encounter began to address the global impact that was already beginning to manifest. People in hospitals around the world are being healed while watching your portrayal, God revealed, and Jonathan realized that miracles were happening in real time through the show. Atheists are encountering me in their living rooms. Divorced couples are reconciling. Prodigal children are calling their parents. The ripple effects of faithful obedience were already spreading across continents in ways Jonathan had never imagined. As the presence grew even stronger, the voice delivered the most shocking revelation yet. This recording will one day be played before world leaders who need to hear my voice. Jonathan's eyes widened as God revealed the ultimate destiny of this audio file. When the time comes, you will know exactly when and where to share this testimony. The idea that this intimate encounter would somehow influence global leaders in the future was almost too incredible to believe. Your scars from addiction and depression are not wounds to hide but victories to display, the voice declared, completely reframing Jonathan's understanding of his painful past, as affirmed in 2 Corinthians 12 verse 9, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness." Every person who sees your vulnerability will find permission to be honest about their own struggles. The transparency God was calling him to would require courage, but it would also unlock healing for countless others who felt disqualified by their own failures. The supernatural encounter reached its crescendo as the voice prepared to deliver the final revelation. What you are about to hear next will change not only your life but the course of entertainment itself. Jonathan felt his heart pounding as he realized that the most extraordinary part of this divine visitation was yet to come. Tomorrow's phone call will be just the beginning of signs and wonders that will authenticate your calling to a skeptical world. The stage was set for a miraculous confirmation that would shatter any doubt about the supernatural reality of this encounter. The voice suddenly changed, becoming even more powerful and unmistakably divine. "I am the Alpha and the Omega, the first and the last," as declared in Revelation 22 verse 13. And Jonathan realized he was hearing directly from Jesus Christ himself. The phone's recording app showed unprecedented audio levels as the voice of the Son of God filled his small apartment. "Look at your phone screen now," the voice commanded, and Jonathan gasped as words began appearing on the device without anyone typing them. The text read, "This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased," echoing Matthew 3 verse 17. As Jonathan stared at the impossible message on his screen, Jesus continued speaking, "You have been portraying me, but now I want you to know me as I truly am." The temperature in the room shifted dramatically, and Jonathan felt as if he was sitting in the presence of pure love and holiness. "Every scene you filmed, I have been there with you. Every tear you've shed as my character, I have felt in my heart." The revelation that Jesus had been present during every moment of filming The Chosen transformed Jonathan's understanding of his entire career. But tomorrow, when Margaret calls from Scotland, she will tell you something that only you and I know from this conversation, Jesus revealed, setting up an undeniable confirmation of this supernatural encounter. She will say the exact words I am about to speak to you now. Jonathan leaned forward, knowing that his faith would never be the same after hearing what came next. She will tell you that her son spoke my name for the first time in 6 months while watching you portray me, and that his first words after awakening from his coma were, "Jesus is in the room with us." Jonathan's sobs filled the apartment as Jesus delivered the most shocking revelation of all: her son's healing has already begun, not because of your acting, but because of your willingness to be my vessel. The phone continued recording as Jesus explained that miracles were happening around the world through the chosen in ways that defied medical explanation. Doctors will be baffled by recoveries that coincide with episodes where I perform healings. What they don't understand is that I am still the same yesterday, today, and forever, as affirmed in Hebrews 13 verse 8, that the supernatural power working through entertainment was beyond anything Jonathan had ever imagined possible. This recording will serve as proof that I still speak to my children, Jesus declared. And Jonathan understood that the audio file would become a powerful testimony to God's continued presence in the modern world. When skeptics demand evidence of the supernatural, you will have 47 minutes of undeniable proof that heaven still touches earth. The phone screen showed the recording was still running, capturing every word of this impossible conversation. But more than evidence, this is my love letter to everyone who has ever wondered if I am real, if I care, if I am still performing miracles in a broken world. As the presence of Jesus filled every corner of the apartment, Jonathan felt his calling crystallize with absolute clarity: you are not just an actor playing Jesus. You are my ambassador, carrying my heart to a world that has forgotten how to hope. The words settled into his soul like seeds that would grow into a lifetime of purposeful ministry. Every person who meets you after today will encounter me through you, not because you are perfect, but because you are surrendered. The transformation from insecure actor to confident minister of the gospel was complete, sealed by the voice of Christ himself. As the supernatural presence began to fade, Jonathan remained on his knees, clutching his phone like a lifeline to the divine encounter that had just changed everything. The recording app showed that 47 minutes and 33 seconds of audio had been captured, creating permanent evidence of the impossible conversation. "Thank you, Lord," he whispered through tears of gratitude and awe, finally understanding that his struggles had been preparing him for this moment of complete surrender. The apartment felt different now, charged with a holiness that would linger for days, reminding him that heaven had touched his small corner of earth. Jonathan spent the rest of the night listening to the recording over and over, marveling at the clarity of Jesus' voice and the specific prophecies that had been given. Each time he heard his own voice responding to Christ, he was amazed by the authenticity of the encounter. This wasn't a dream or hallucination, but a real conversation with the living God. The resignation letter he'd written earlier lay forgotten on his desk, replaced by a new understanding of his calling that filled him with unshakable confidence. As dawn broke over Chicago, Jonathan knew he would never again doubt whether God was using him for something extraordinary. The next evening, at exactly 7:23 p.m., Jonathan's phone rang with a call from Scotland. Margaret's tearful voice carried across the ocean as she shared the miraculous news that her son had awakened from his coma while watching The Chosen, speaking Jesus' name as his first words in 6 months. "He said something strange, though," Margaret continued, unknowingly providing the confirmation Jesus had promised. "He looked around the hospital room and said, 'Jesus is in the room with us,' just like he could see someone we couldn't." Jonathan's hands trembled as he realized that every word of the supernatural prophecy had come true exactly as foretold. 6 months later, sitting in that podcast studio, Jonathan had finally decided it was time to share the recording that had transformed his life and ministry. The audio file had remained his most treasured secret, played only during his private prayer times when he needed to remember that God was real and present. Dozens of miraculous confirmations had followed that night, healings connected to The Chosen episodes, supernatural encounters reported by viewers, and a global revival that traced its roots back to the show's impact. Now, with the host's microphone ready to broadcast his testimony to millions, Jonathan knew that God's timing was perfect for revealing this supernatural encounter to the world. Jonathan Roumie stood in the podcast studio, his heart pounding as he prepared to share the 47-minute recording that had reshaped his soul. That night at 3:33 a.m. in his Chicago apartment had been more than a moment. It was a divine collision that redefined his purpose, his faith, and his very existence. The trembling actor who once drafted resignation letters, crippled by self-doubt and the crushing weight of portraying Jesus in The Chosen, had been transformed. In his place stood a man anchored in unshakable conviction, a vessel of God's grace who now understood the truth of 2 Corinthians 12 verse 9, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness." Every scene he filmed since that encounter carried a sacred weight, an anointing that touched millions, sparking testimonies of healing, reconciliation, and renewed faith from every corner of the globe. Reflecting on that night, Jonathan marveled at how God had woven his brokenness into a tapestry of divine purpose. The wooden crucifix, hand-carved by his Lebanese grandmother, still hung above his desk, no longer just a family heirloom but a testament to the generational prayers that had paved the way for his calling. It reminded him of the countless rosaries his grandmother prayed, her faith a quiet force that bridged decades, leading him to that sacred encounter. Her legacy taught him that faith isn't about perfection but persistence, about clinging to God through doubt and darkness, trusting that He is always near, as Psalm 145 verse 18 promises, "The Lord is near to all who call on Him in truth." As he faced the podcast microphone, Jonathan felt the weight of sharing this story with a world hungry for hope yet skeptical of miracles. His voice steadied with a peace that only comes from encountering the living God. "Before I press play on this recording," he said, addressing the unseen millions, "I need you to know this isn't about me being chosen because I'm special. It's about a God who seeks out the desperate, the broken, the ones who dare to cry out in their darkest hour." His eyes locked on the camera, carrying a fire born of divine revelation. If you've ever wondered if God still speaks, if miracles still happen, if faith can stand in a world that doubts, this audio will show you that He is closer than your next breath. The lessons Jonathan learned that night were not just personal, they were a clarion call for every Catholic, every Christian, every soul seeking meaning in a fractured world. He realized that God doesn't call the qualified, He qualifies the called, as 1 Corinthians 1 verse 27 declares, "God chose what is foolish in the world to shame the wise, God chose what is weak in the world to shame the strong." His struggles with addiction, depression, and insecurity weren't disqualifications but invitations for God's mercy to shine through. This truth reshaped his ministry, teaching him that vulnerability is a bridge to others' hearts, allowing them to see Christ's humanity and divinity in his own frail humanity. Jonathan's journey mirrored the Catholic ethos of embracing the cross, a cornerstone of American Catholic spirituality where suffering and redemption intertwine. Like the saints revered in parishes across the U.S., from Saint Therese of Lisieux's Little Way to Saint John Paul II's call to "Be not afraid," Jonathan learned that surrender to God's will transforms pain into purpose. His grandmother's crucifix, a symbol of sacrifice and love, reminded him of the Eucharistic heart of Catholicism, Christ's broken body offered for the world's healing. This resonated deeply with American Catholics, who gather weekly at Mass to encounter the same Jesus who spoke to Jonathan, trusting in His real presence to renew their lives. As his finger hovered over the play button, Jonathan felt a surge of gratitude for the global impact of The Chosen. The show had become a modern-day cathedral, reaching souls who might never step into a church. Testimonies flooded in, a mother in Ohio whose son returned to confession after a decade, a veteran in Texas finding peace from PTSD after watching an episode, a teenager in California choosing life over despair because of Jesus' words spoken through Jonathan. These stories echoed Acts 2 verse 17, "In the last days, God says, "I will pour out my Spirit on all people." Jonathan realized his role was not to perform but to be a conduit for God's Spirit, a mission that aligned with the Catholic call to evangelize through witness and love. Looking into the camera, he spoke with a conviction that cut through the noise of a skeptical age. "This recording isn't just my story, it's yours. It's for anyone who's ever felt unworthy, lost, or forgotten. God sees you, He knows your name, and He's waiting to meet you where you are." His smile radiated the joy of someone who had tasted eternity and longed to share it. If this story stirs your heart, if you believe God is still moving, type "I believe" in the comments and hit subscribe to join a community of faith that's growing worldwide. Share your own story of God's grace below, and don't miss the end. There's a revelation waiting that will leave you in awe. Jonathan's heart swelled with purpose, knowing that this moment was a fulfillment of God's promise that night, to use his testimony to ignite hope in a world desperate for it. The question wasn't whether God was real, he had proven that in an apartment at 3:33 a.m. The question was whether the world was ready to listen, to open their hearts, and to encounter the God who still speaks, still heals, and still loves beyond measure. As he pressed play, Jonathan knew he was no longer just an actor. He was a disciple, called to carry Christ's light into the darkness, one story, one heart, one miracle at a time.